afternoon, everyone. My name is Marie Sweeney, and I'm with Quality Smart Solutions, and I'd like to welcome everyone to everything you'll want to know about your medical device business unlocked. Today, we have a wonderful panel of experts to provide their insights. Just as a reminder to everyone, please feel free to pose any questions into the chat, and we will get to them throughout today. Now, just to hop right into it, I'm going to have everyone give a little bit of an overview of who they are and what they're here to share in terms of their expertise, and then we'll hop right into some questions. So starting with Femi, would you like to give everyone a little bit of an overview of who you are and what you're going to be sharing today?
Thank you, Mary. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Femi Morakinyo, and I'm a regulatory specialist with Quality Smart Solutions. And I provide regulatory oversight and work surrounding product medical device licensing, both in Canada and US.
Thank you. And we'll move on to Doran. I hope I'm saying that correctly.
Yeah, close enough. It's Duran.
Duran.
That's me. So I'm not associated with Quality Smart Solutions. My background, studies is mechanical engineering, but I've been in the medical device industry for probably almost 7 years now. Started off at one of the bigger firms in Toronto that used to be Baylis, now owned by Boston Scientific. And then the past year and a half, I have been with a startup called Xpan, trying to commercialize a new medical device. And so I'll be speaking towards, product development and more of R&D side of medical devices.
Excellent. And next up, we have April. Just so you know, April, you are on mute right now.
Yep. Hi, my name is April Corella. I have a very interesting background in music and physics, and really caught the bug in medical device when I had my own company working for different clients. I've worked in all aspects of medical device development, from regulatory, operations, R&D, and quality being my favorite. And I currently have my own company where I consult different range of companies. I've worked with small, mid, and large, and my specialty is in PEMS devices. So software, hardware, cybersecurity is what I typically assist with, as well as risk management and any quality needs.
Excellent. Thank you all very much for that. Hopefully that will allow people to kind of know where to direct some questions throughout the next hour. But we'll start right at the top with a question for Femi. And I think just to kind of keep things flowing, we'll kind of cover regulatory and then move into the other sections. If anybody has any additional insights after Femi, please feel free to hop right in and provide some feedback as well. So the first question today is what are the requirements to import a medical device?
Okay, thank you. I think it depends on the class of the device. So for class 1 devices, the importer must have a valid medical device establishment license, MDEL, with import activity unless exempted. So I'll give a couple of examples of exemptions that are applicable. For class 2, class 3, and class 4 devices, apart from having an MDL to import, the device must have an MDL. The device must have been licensed by Health Canada. Okay, so this is specifically for Canada. So you have MDL, and then the importer must have an MDL with import activity, again, unless exempted. One of the notable exemptions to this rule or to this requirement is, for instance, if it's a retailer or a company that sells directly to end users, then you are exempted from having an MDL, okay, for class 1, as it is. So another exemption is if it's an healthcare facility, they are exempted. Manufacturers of class 2, class 3, and class 4 are also exempted from having an MDL. because they are expected to have an MDL. So the device class 2, class 3, and class 4 ought to have been licensed by Health Canada. So they have an MDL license. So they are exempted from having an MDEL. So MDEL, Medical Device Establishment License, for class 1, and for class 2, 3, and 4, both MDEL as well as MDL, which is a medical device license. That would be it.
Okay. And you answered my second and third question through just that one answer. So thank you, Femi. Next, I have someone who is outside of Canada. Do they also need an MDEL to sell that medical device into Canada?
Yes, it depends. Again, if you're outside of Canada and you want to sell your medical device in Canada, yes, you need, and no, you don't. So I will explain. If you sell exclusively to an MDEL holder in Canada, so you are outside of Canada, but you sell the operational word is exclusively. If you sell exclusively to an MDEL holder in Canada, and your name is not on the label, so you are not the manufacturer, you are not the private labeler whatsoever, no license is required. However, if you sell exclusively to healthcare facilities and retailers in Canada, and your name is not on the label, MDEL is required. So the third scenario is you sell to importers as well as healthcare facilities in Canada or retailers, and your name is also not on the label, MDEL is required. This is all about traceability. Health Canada is interested in being able to trace the devices. So you're outside of Canada, you sell exclusively to an MDEL holder, no MDEL is required of you because the MDEL holder has a license already, can be traced. However, if you sell to healthcare facility, you sell to retailer, MDEL is required in that instance.
Okay, and I almost feel like I maybe should have started with this question, but how are medical devices classified in Canada?
Okay, well,
You're getting all the little ones today.
yeah. There are a set of, a bit fairly complex rule employed in the classification of medical devices in Canada. Briefly, there are 4 classes of medical devices based on the associated risk with these devices. Class 1 being the least risky, and class 4 being the highest risk level. So class 2, 3, and 4 require MDL. And like I mentioned earlier on, class 1 requires only an MDL as a manufacturer, okay? Class 1 devices are considered to be very low risk, and examples of class 1 products are something like elastic bandages, probably tongue depressors, some form of, again, not all, but, cotton wool, for instance, can be classified as class 1. These devices do not require a medical device license at all, but they must still meet certain requirements as set out in the MDR. Class 2 devices are next in line. They are considered to be medium risk items. So you have maybe powered toothbrush as an example, surgical gloves as an example, some glucose monitors as examples, and they require an MDL license. Class 3 are considered to be moderate risk, or highest risk, close to class 4. These includes pacemakers. These are considered to be high risk, they are considered to affect life or impact on life, so they require an MDL from Health Canada. And manufacturers are often required to provide or to demonstrate safety as well as effectiveness of this device. It's important that the safety of the device is, are guaranteed, and the effectiveness as to the claim for which the device is being marketed. So In summary, there are 4 classifications, usually based on complex, set of rules to know, okay, is it class 1, is it class 2, is it powered, for instance, is it using a battery, or is it using any form of electric power, So that is the approach by which medical devices are classified in Canada.
Okay. So it sounds like getting into 2, 3, and 4, working with a consultant and specialist might be the safest pathway forward for many startups. Just to make sure the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted in the correct classification, which feel free to reach out to us if that's where you're kind of struggling at the moment. But also in recognition that we probably have several entrepreneurs attending today. Can you tell us a little bit about what the small business application is?
Okay, small business application came into effect in April of 2020. This is essentially to encourage the small business as it is. The fees associated with some of the license or applications can be a deterrent to small businesses. So any business that has fewer than 100 employees, or you have fewer than 100 employees, or you have a annual turnover of between $30,000 and $5 million, is considered as a small business by Health Canada's criteria. So you have either of the two. Your annual turnover is between 30,000. It could even be 0. So if it's a new company, yes, it is allowed. It is considered to be a small business. The most important thing is the annual turnover is maximum of 5 million, Canadian dollars, and you have less than 100 employees, then you qualify as a small business, but you need to apply for that status with Health Canada. You need to apply for that status with Health Canada. And once you are granted that that small business status, there are a couple of benefit from it. One is that your first pre-market evaluation, if it is a company that is about to submit a drug application, for instance, application, that very first application will be for free. Okay. You're also eligible for a 50% reduction in pre-market evaluation fees for drug products. There is a 25% discount for the right to sell fees. And there is also a 25% reduction for all establishment license fee. So specifically for clients who want to go into medical device, distribution and marketing, if they qualify for a small business application, they are eligible for 25% reduction in their MDEL license fees.
Excellent. So there's significant value to this new program. I'm looking forward to talking to you about learning more about that for our customers. All right, so I'm going to have 2 more quick questions for Femi before moving into our other specialist categories. But okay, let's see what we have here. So we've covered a lot of Canada. Now, when people are looking to the US, what are the device classes and pre-market license requirements for the FDA?
Okay. Just like we have in Canada, there are a set of rules as well for FDA. The major difference between the classification in Canada and in US is that FDA divides medical devices into 3 classes, unlike 4 in Canada, into 3. The classification is also based on the risk. Okay. So class 1 devices as per FDA, these are simple devices again. Oftentimes they are class 1 devices here in Canada as well. So minimal risk to the user. They are subject to general regulatory controls, and they do not require pre-market submissions. So again, the same example that I gave earlier on for Canada will suffice here. Then we have class 2, which is like the moderate risk to the user. class 2 devices as per FDA. These will require a pre-market notification. Usually, this is called the 510k submission. There are a few other pathways, but 510k is the most used approach to get licensure for class 2 devices in US. So you need to have that before class 2 devices can be legally marketed in US. The third one is a class 3 device, which is the highest. Typically, they are implanted medical devices or sustained life, pacemaker, blood vessel stent, and all of that. They are highest risk for patients, and so the approval or the process is more stringent than for class 2. These devices require PMA submission. They require a PMA submission, pre-market approval submission before being marketed. Manufacturers are usually required to demonstrate, again, safety and effectiveness. Often some of these devices will have clinical investigational device or trials and all of those to ensure that it is safe to be used by the consumers. So 3 classes: class 1, class 2, and class 3. Often class 3 in FDA is equivalent of class 4 in Canada. Some will fall into class 3, but here in Canada, so that is the classification as per FDA.
Perfect. Thank you. And you touched on 510K, which was going to be my final question for you this afternoon. So we can always circle back if anyone has any specific questions about 510K submissions. Again, feel free to pop those into the chat. But we are going to move on to Doran's experience with device engineering. And I'm going to start with a question for you, Doran, which is, what is the medical device development process like? And how do you go about designing a medical device?
All right, good question. So the medical device development process is a fairly long one. It's not typically something you do in a week. It can take anywhere from a few years to many, many years. And typically starts with an idea that either an engineer has or a user has that is communicated to the business or someone else in the business. So you get that voice of the customer that kind of gets further boiled down to market needs, looking at is there any IP out there that might prevent us from selling it? Is the technology readily accessible, or is there any dangerous that we'd look at if we were to try to commercialize this? So you're kind of really focusing now on the feasibility. Once you kind of get through that phase, you get into what I call the concept phase. So you come up with an idea, test it out, further develop what your vision of the product might be. You get into making some prototypes, testing them out, start getting maybe some key contacts that you would share that with, get their thoughts on. And then, once you have something solid in hand, you go into detailed design. You try to get everything from components to manufacturers lined up. Once you have that, you get into more of the design verification or validation, where you ensure that your design works as intended. If, for example, you're trying to have a pacemaker that it's sending the right signals that you expect it to, and then you kind of get closer to launch. So very long process. And obviously, this doesn't include anything regulatory. So this is purely just the product.
And as a follow-up question to that, throughout this lengthy process, what are design controls for medical devices?
Right. So design controls are, I guess, more of a quality thing, but they're still very relevant to the product design as a whole. because they are practices and procedures that are usually baked into a company's quality system. And that includes items such as design inputs and outputs, design reviews, that really control how the engineers and other staff design a product to ensure that it meets all the user needs and any relevant requirements. And in a way, it also prevents any future product design issues. And it's also required by FDA to meet all their their regulations. And so that's kind of design controls in a nutshell without diving too deep.
Perfect. And for anybody who does have any additional follow-up questions, please put them in the chat. And if you wanted to reach out to Doran or any of our panelists today directly, you can email us for their contact information, or they are all active on LinkedIn, and I'm sure would welcome the opportunity to connect with you. So next question for you, Doran. What is design verification and validation, and why is it needed?
Right, another good question. So as we all know, medical devices need to be safe. Users want them to be effective. They should be working. When you buy a pacemaker, you'd expect it to work once it's put in the patient. So to ensure that happens, a lot of testing, investigations go into it, especially when something is critical to life. So this is really where design verification and validation comes into play. And so I'll start with verification. So design verification is a test method. It's usually completed by the engineers and ensures that the design outputs, which we'll get to in a sec, meet the specified design inputs, which are in a way tied to users' requirements. So to go back a little bit to even the design controls. So as part of the design controls, the engineering team comes up with design inputs, which are driven by the user or industry standards, regulations, things like that give us, let's say, a force that or some weight that the device has to withstand. And that is translated into material properties, engineering drawings, etc., that are design outputs. But now, how do you know that your device can withstand that weight? Well, you verify it through a verification test and you put a weight on it. Does it hold a weight? Yes, you pass. So that's the verification side. On the other side, we have validation, and that's kind of tying back the user outputs to design or the user. So sorry, from the user's perspective, is the device working as intended? Is this what the user actually wanted? And so it would typically involve testing either in an actual or simulated clinical setting. Many businesses do an animal study before an inpatient validation. And basically, a successful validation proves that the design or the device meets the needs of the user. And so you would typically give the product to a user, have them run through a typical procedure, and evaluate, did the pacemaker keep the heart rate at the right speed, for example? Were they able to implant it properly? And obviously, if any issues arise, you would not be able to commercialize your product. So that's design, verification, validation in a quick few minutes.
In a nutshell, I know these are loaded questions for you guys to answer in a quick.
Feel free to ask any further questions. There's lots we can talk about these all day. I'm trying to give a quick intro.
I've got two more for you, Doran, and then we're going to kind of move into a transition through the engineering to product development. And get April's insights as well, because I am interested to hear what she has to say too. But my next question for you, Doran, is what is a design history file? Or a DHF?
Yeah, so design history file with HF, at least from my perspective, is a big archive of documents that are created throughout the medical device product development process. So that product development process we spoke about earlier has, a whole bunch of design controls, which are in a way documents that the engineers create, management team approves, and it really shows the history of the design. And aside from it being mandatory for all medical devices, it's really used to provide evidence that, all of the design controls and procedures that are in place as part of the quality system are appropriately followed and documented. And so it would have records relating to, anything from the user needs, design inputs, to all your verification, validation methods, reports, etc. So it's really a whole bunch of files in a way that provide a history of the design.
All the things that Femi wants to see when you come to him with your MDEL applications. Okay, and one more, and I think this is a good transitional question for moving into April's input as well. We're going to start with Doran, and then as well, if you want to kind of pop in right after this, April, with kind of your 2 cents on this question, we'll use that to lead into the next ones. We have, what is the difference between product development and design controls?
All right, so I guess we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but I kind of reiterate that, product development is the entire, or at least I say the entire process of developing a product, while design controls ensure that the right product is designed. So it's more on, so the design controls are more on the quality side. The product development is really focused on, let's get this to market. And then the design controls is, let's get it to market, but let's also have all the right, safety and efficacy in there as we go to market. So I think that's my perspective on that, at least.
All right.
Yeah,
and
I would say that's correct. And Duran, the key word there is control, right? We get to a certain point in our development where we want to be controlling these changes. Otherwise, the goalpost keeps moving and we never meet the goal. So, yeah.
Perfect. And just before moving forward, I have a quick question for Femi from one of our viewers today. They ask, if we are shipping a Class 1 medical device into the US from Canada, direct to the end consumer, or to a US retailer, do we as a Canadian warehouse require an MDEL? We are a logistics company and not a distributor or manufacturer.
Okay. All right, so Class 1 devices moving from Canada to US. So Class 1 devices, it's going to be based on FDA's rule. It's going into US. So once these devices are the same, I mean, they are also classified as Class 1 in US. Remember that there is a bit of difference between classification in US and in Canada, but largely, nearly all the Class 1 devices in Canada are considered to be Class 1 devices in US. So if you are going to retailers and all of those ones, you don't need an MDEL, to move your product into US.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Now, I just didn't want to miss that question for our viewer. So my next question for April is, where are we going to start today? We've got some really interesting ones. I'm going to start with, what trends do you see in the industry in regards to new product development right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. So most recently, and as we move forward in the future, everything is becoming more and more tech enabled. I'm seeing a lot of things that are related to having a smartphone app, or having a fob that is attached to the device, or even have a user interface that is smarter than just a couple of buttons. The thing to consider there is, with that, there's a cybersecurity aspect. And so if we're going into that realm, we need to be sure that we're thinking more and more into cybersecurity. So with those trends going more tech means trends in medical devices becoming more cyber secure and having that that element and those resources that are able to meet that need. Additionally, the thing that I've seen recently is combination devices. Post COVID, I've seen a lot of devices get smaller, more ambulatory, and be able to combine a drug element with it in order for the user to take it home and administer their own treatment or have a healthcare professional administer the treatment. With that, again, like cybersecurity, we have to be sure that we're meeting the need to have that combination device. I typically see people who are either specialists in one or the other, right? Either in pharma or in the device aspect. So having that combination or those resources who can work together, it's really key in being sure that the development of the device is going to be successful and move through the regulatory hurdles in a timely way.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Now, that is another. Okay. So what do you consider in kind of key important portions for consideration when putting together a medical device development team?
Yeah, so I would say the most important thing for putting a team together is putting together people who can communicate. It's a very unique type of process, unlike other types of engineering. Like everywhere else, you're going to have the different phases, right? The norming, the storming, the forming. But the quicker you could get to the forming, and the quicker that you get people who are willing to listen more than to speak, it would be helpful. I would say, in my experience working in medical device, most people are very gracious and very willing to collaborate. So that's already a given. But communication being the most important, and then also being able to trust those people with their level of expertise. I mean, I've worked in some companies that are so large that the decision making is always being passed around. But if you have that person with that level of expertise, things get done quicker. So if you're looking at a tight development timeline, or if you're looking, to report to your shareholders about where your device is, it's good to have that really firmed up resources across the board, both for regulatory, quality, R&D, mechanical, software, in order to make those decisions quickly.
Excellent. And actually, Duran, can I ask that you, from an engineering perspective, maybe add your 2 cents into this question as well?
Sure. All right. So from the engineering perspective, so just to reiterate, so the question was what you need to consider when putting a product development team. Is that right?
Yeah, a medical device development team together.
So from the engineer, since we are more on the technical side, we like to, at least I like to have a team that has a strong mechanical, or at least I guess it depends what the background is, but assuming it was a mechanical device, you have a strong mechanical background and have the expertise, not just to design, but also to manufacture. And I guess that doesn't have to be limited to a mechanical device, even for pharma. If you're designing a drug, you always want to have the expertise early on and consider how you may be able to commercialize it. And so part of that team, although it may be cost effective to have, many new grads and whatnot to develop something, it's still good to have someone with that experience that can, look kind of top down and make sure that whatever is being designed can indeed be commercialized. And then having all the quality checks in place, having proper procedures that the engineers can follow. Because many times, if the engineers don't have balance, but including me, which I can work with, you can start getting into sidetrack, making changes that maybe you shouldn't be making, and thereby slowing the whole process down. So that's my perspective for that, at least.
Okay, and my understanding from both of you is that just communication and trust, so everybody can stay in their lane, but actually work together to an end result seems to be kind of a mutual opinion there. Okay, so for April, can you provide some insights into the most common gaps that you've seen with startups' product development stages?
Yeah, absolutely. So I may have a little bias here, but I really think that with startups, typically quality isn't brought in early enough. I think maybe when there's a point, the company may think, oh, we want to market this, or we want to go from a research use only organization to a medical device product. Then quality is brought in. I think the earlier the better, even if it's a part-time or an external candidate, because they can be able to start mapping out what the requirements are for that. Sometimes it's a little too little too late once you get to the point where you state we do want to market this, because then there's certain things that should have been completed early on that now you're having to crash the resources or include budgetary wise is going to increase because now you need to meet these deadlines. So I would say not bringing quality in early enough. And then with that is not completing the risk assessment documentation early enough as well. I've seen before in some startups that the risk documentation is considered like a checkbox activity. Let's just make sure that we get it completed. But in my mind, everything is tied to risk. Like Femi was saying, determining how are you going to classify this device? What different geographies are we going to take this? If you don't have that risk assessment in place, I think that it's going to take twice as long because it's tied to requirements. It's tied to regulatory submission, and it's really tied to every part of the design. So I have a passion for that and believe that's something that a lot of startups should be considering. And then I think the other two things that I would state is a lot of times in the research space, there's a lot of feasibility studies that are being conducted, or there's a lot of characteristic studies that are being conducted, but they're not necessarily documented formally, which could lead to requirements or could lead to tolerances. So having the mindset that these requirements, these tests need to be formalized is a good habit to have when you're a startup, because then you can have a good outline of the design that you're thinking about and then what requirements you want to meet for that design.
Now, I think you may have answered the majority of this question that I'm about to pose, but if you'd like to add on to it, are there any areas in the process that you wish more time was spent on, other than risk assessment and quality, which you've just highlighted?
Yeah, I think sometimes when developing a product, the manufacturing aspect may get pushed to a tighter and tighter timeline. And so getting through the process qualifications, the ability to do so is less, maybe a matter of weeks, maybe a matter of days. So I would like to see more thought and time put into in-process testing, making sure that the equipment that's included, the training, et cetera, is put into place well before commercial begins. Ideally, it would be nice that as development is dying down, that operation is increasing. And so having that operations team involved early on is good, because then they can start, you don't want to fall into what they call the ugly baby, right? Where you just take this developed product, throw it over the wall, and then operations has to deal with it. You want to be sure that operations is being considered early on so that it's actually a manufacturable device.
Excellent advice from everyone so far today. Thank you. And I'm going to pose the next question first to April and then again to Doran and Femi for any additional input. But what key considerations should be front of mind when selecting a development partner?
For me, it's somebody who's very collaborative. I'll say in my experience, I've had it both ways, where I've worked with a development partner where there wasn't very much collaboration. And sometimes it's like hitting a wall, or getting things approved, such as NCRs or design changes, is very difficult. If you're able to develop that relationship very early on, it's a lot easier. Medical device has its challenges no matter what, but it's a lot easier in order to come to an agreement on what the requirements are going to be for your design, where you're going to market the design, and then make sure you have a really, really good quality agreement in place with your development partner, because it's good to delineate who's going to be doing what in terms of responsibilities for designing your medical device.
Perfect. And gentlemen, do you have any input? Please feel free to share.
All right, I guess I can jump in there. Yeah, I mean, as far as partners, I personally find it difficult if you don't have past experience or know someone who worked with somebody. It's sometimes tough to know what to expect. However, I'd say, for any partner, you want to make sure that, or at least try to get an idea of what other projects they worked at. Obviously, they have the expertise that you need. For example, if you're going to design an electrified medical device and that partner has never done that, probably not a good idea. Even they say that they could do it, probably not a good idea to proceed if it's not something that they've ever done. The other thing is to see, at least something that I see a value, is to see if they have any manufacturing capabilities and where those lie in the US, Canada, or abroad. Sometimes there could be advantage of having, manufacturing facilities, in their facility or locally, so that you reduce the lead times for getting components made. Even for prototyping, it's going to be a lot quicker for startups, for example, to turn around things if they have that expertise in-house.
Femi, from the regulatory side, is there anything that you think should be front of mind if someone's looking at a development partner?
Sure. So I want to just add that the time spent behind the scene in terms of developing the product, in terms of assessing the risk and all of these things, is as important as the time that it will take, if not more, than when you eventually put the product forward for licensing. So we've seen clients that will rush to do all of these background activities, and then when it comes to providing documentation and files to both FDA and or Air Canada, then you see gaps. So the global outlook, like April mentioned, you want to take a look at, okay, what are the market that we are looking at? How can we at best harmonize the requirement across all these regulatory jurisdictions? They are as well as important as the timeline that often clients will have to say, hey, I want to be in market by April next year.
Yes, I find that I say to our customers quite a bit, you got to look at this process as a marathon and not a race.
Yep.
They hate it, but it's the truth. Okay, so one last question for you, April, before we get into kind of general roundtable questions. But what do you feel is needed for a successful transition from development to commercial launch of product?
Yeah, I believe I touched upon it a little bit earlier, stating that getting operations involved at the right time, not necessarily at the beginning of development, but maybe when engineering testing begins or pre-design verification, in order to get their feedback and make sure that the device is actually manufacturable. I think the other thing is, don't be afraid to iterate requirements and with that tolerances and making the product and the in-process specifications. I think sometimes the requirements or the tolerances are very wide, and then that could also be a regulatory issue, because sometimes the regulatory bodies may come back and state, well, why is your tolerance so wide when you really only need it here. So I think just consistently thinking about how we're going to manufacture this device is very important. I can tell you, like, one time we made this really great device that very novel, but the way to make it was very difficult. You had to, it was destructive every time it would be returned. There was no way we could service the unit and then bring it back to the customer. So, and it was very expensive. It was about a $4,000 unit that we had. So, we really needed to iterate the manufacturing process for it early on during development, just thinking about what can we do instead of gluing these two pieces together, gluing the screen on, using these one-way screws. Maybe we have to put bosses into the molding. And so we were able to get a manufactured product by the end of development, which made it a lot more easier for commercial transfer. So I would say just think about operations early and often. And if you're in development, be friends with operations.
Happy team makes happy products. Okay, so with just under 15 minutes left, if any of our viewers have any more questions they would like to pose, please feel free to put those into the chat. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck with my questions. Okay, so my next two questions are pertaining to distribution. I know it's not anybody's specialty, but with your experience, I'm sure you've run into some challenges in this regard, especially in the last couple of years. So I'm going to actually pose this to Duran first, then April. What are the biggest challenges or roadblocks to smooth distribution have you come across in the last few years, whether it be components that you need for your product development or engineering, or rolling out that product once it's completed?
All right, yeah. So, I mean, as we know, COVID has really put a hamper on supply chains worldwide. I mean, the main thing we've been doing is being proactive and allotting a lot of lead time for whatever we need, especially if it's coming from overseas. Luckily, a lot of our components we were able to find local suppliers for, and that's really has made our supply chain issue easier. That being said, we do have some parts that come from China, for example, and so distribution wise, we're all trying to find alternate suppliers, making sure for every component you don't have just the one shop down the road that can do it, because maybe tomorrow they're not around anymore. You always have to have that backup. So that's my side for that question.
And April?
Yeah, Duran, I think you really hit on the nail on the head there, stating that lead times for components is very, very rough. We've gone into like tertiary and quadruple backups for suppliers, just because it's been so difficult, especially with PCBAs. I would say if you're in development, plan on PCBA manufacturing being 18 months to 2 years, because sourcing requirements has been very difficult. And I know there's a transition plan to bring a lot of that more locally, but we're not going to see that for a while. To kind of navigate through that, it's just finding those suppliers, even if it's at the component level. Sometimes finding just a specific component is going to speed up the process a lot quicker. What has also helped us too is just having technology to our advantage, right? So now both teams are able. If I have a team that's global, we're going to have a share folder in order to have all of this documentation together, so they don't necessarily have to wait for everything before they process product. So just being able to use what technology is on hand to make sure that when something is received, it's going to be processed quicker is helpful. Just being able to fill in whatever little tiny bottlenecks there are, because we can't really help the supply chain aspect, but maybe we can help with the documentation aspect to make sure it gets processed quicker.
Excellent. And from a regulatory QA side, Femi, do you have any, or have you experienced any challenges in terms of distribution with our customers over the last 2 years that has provided you with some insights? Or do you like to just stay out of that?
I think the aspect that relates to regulatory in terms of licensing is the shortage of, essentials, devices, both Health Canada and FDA were able to sort of provided some emergencies route to improve supply. for some of these highly sought after or in demand medical devices. For instance, at the beginning of the pandemic, shortage of hand sanitizers, disinfectants, gloves, mask, and all of those things. So there were emergencies provision to sort of allow many new establishments to come into the space to bring in import products that were either though not licensed by either FDA or Health Canada, but had approval in other jurisdictions. So that help a bit to improve supply. It's getting better. Some of the emergencies regulations are being phased out, and so again, establishments who either to had operated under these short-term gap measures are being encouraged to now transition into the full gamut of regulations, as it were. So we are looking forward to all of that. And here at Quality Smart Solution, we are open to help clients to, sort of make that transition from operating under the emergency provision to getting all your full approval and establishment licenses, as the case may be.
Excellent. And you have just provided me with a follow-up question for you, Femi. Because I do feel that some people may be looking for ways around these logistical challenges, and if they are considering private label device licensing, what are the requirements pertaining to that?
Okay, private label devices are kind of in between. So they are licensed. They are devices that have been previously licensed, fully licensed, but you have a market arrangement whereby you want to put in your own brand name on these devices, okay, rather than the original, or the brand name of the manufacturer, okay. One of the requirements is a letter signed by the senior official of the original manufacturer, essentially saying, hey, we agree to produce this device for XYZ. It is the same device as, licensed by you. So they will provide the detail and all the license to say, hey, this is the device, but we are going to slap on it a new brand name for this company. That letter is required. Labeling for the private label device is required. So the client needs to do its own label with, the new brand name, as it were, or what we call the private label brand name. And the label, of course, need to meet all the requirements of labeling for devices, in Canada, including having an identifier for traceability. So those are the three most important requirements of a private label device. I also probably want to mention that private label establishment, or if you want to private label, you don't need to hold an ISO 40485. If you don't have that, you will be subject to inspection. So it is not as if you have to have it. You don't have to, but if you have, fine. But if you don't, then you just need to go through an inspection by the Health Product and Food Inspectorate.
Excellent.
One other thing is just to say that private label devices, the application is quite, fast. If you have all your documents in place, usually it takes about 15 to 20 days for Health Canada to approve.
That's a nice turnaround. Where I spend most of my time, we never see anything that quickly, so that makes me smile. Okay, so we're coming up on an hour now. We haven't had too many more questions pop in, so I'm going to ask each of you, we're just going to go in a circle here. So starting with Duran again, in a minute or less, what do you think is the most important takeaway from your perspective of the last hour in our panel today?
All right, good question. So I'll take the engineering perspective. I like your point about the supply chain. We've seen that be an issue very often. You're trying to get product, for example, we're trying to commercialize and we're trying to get enough supply. So for those startups or even well-established businesses, get in touch with your supply chain. Make sure you have enough supply for whatever you need for at least the next 6 months, and be proactive about that.
Okay, and we'll go around this. Oh, did you have anything you want to add to that? Sorry,
Nope,
my headphones
that'd be
froze.
my biggest takeaway.
Okay, moving around to April. What would be your largest takeaway for people today?
I would say it's planning. I think everything that you do in medical device requires a lot of planning. So regulatory plan, development plan, even a sourcing plan. We live in the planning world. It's unique in that way where we, plan our work and then work our plan, right, is what they say. And then I'd also say, don't be afraid. I know there's a lot of things to consider in medical device, but, you learn as you go. And, if you have good intentions, you'll be very successful. So, don't be afraid and be sure you plan your work.
Excellent. And Femi, from the quality and regulatory side, what is your number one takeaway for everyone today?
Yeah, number one takeaway for me is documentation. Okay. The two most important things that regulatory authorities are after is effectiveness and safety. So no matter how effective the product is, the device is, how brilliant it is, it must be safe. So safety trumps, in a way, effectiveness. So that need to be taken into consideration. And whenever you are, just like Duran said, and April, all the controls has to be there in order to ensure, product safety. All right. So once we have all of that documentation to demonstrate safety and effectiveness, then the rest is much easy to fly through the approval process.
Excellent. Okay, so my biggest takeaway today, as someone who does not specialize in medical devices and kind of works on the peripheral, is working with people who know what they're talking about. We can't be perfect at everything, but you can be very near perfect at one thing. So if you're kind of coordinating that amongst your group, be it consultants or your internal team, and trusting each other, you are going to have a successful process, or much more likely to have a successful process.
Okay. Agreed.
Does anybody have any last points they'd like to make before I kind of do a bit of a closing out here?
No, I think this is great.
Yeah. Thanks for organizing.
Excellent. Great. I just show up and do the question asking. There's lots of hard workers in the background.
Yeah, sure.
All right. So I wanted to thank the three of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here today and providing your experience and your expertise for all our viewers. I'd like to thank all of our viewers for taking the time to join us today, and remind you that if you do have any follow-up questions, please feel free to email the email address at the bottom of the screen, or you can reach out to anyone individually through LinkedIn or through us, and we'll get it to the right people. And then as well, we do have an events page. If you would like to kind of monitor that, we have plenty of these discussions going on throughout the weeks and the months and the year. And if anyone's really enjoyed it and want to leave anybody a positive review, we're not going to say no, and we'll always say thank you. And feedback is always welcome as well. So once again, thank you everyone for your time today, in joining us and sharing your insights. And we do look forward to our next event. Bye, everyone.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.